Hello guys, welcome to my first part of JavaScript Essentials series of JavaScript tutorials and the videos we are going to see. My name is Mayur Patil and I'm a principal trainer at Logicwaves Academy and a tech head at Aurelia Innovatives. So in this first part, we are going to check the three key important factors about JavaScript and which are intended for a beginner user, a beginner student to understand the basics of JavaScript plus ECMAScript 5 and ECMAScript 6 basics. So let's dive into the first three topics of today's session. Late var constant. Second topic, what is this? And the third one, how we can simplify the arrow function. I have set up a development environment with a Visual Studio Code, which I have installed, but feel free to use any code editor you would like. But Visual Studio Code offers a lot of features and it is platform independent. That means you can use it on Linux as well as on Windows. So I have just created one workspace and we are going to create one basic project over here. I'm going to create a first index HTML. And along with that, we are going to create a brand new file for JavaScript, which we are going to include in our core main index.html. Now, to check what we are writing, we can either double click to this HTML and straight open it in a normal browser, or we can also install an extension provided at Visual Studio Code. The extension I usually use is Live Server. You can find it in the extension panel. If you can find it, you can install it. Since I already have installed, you don't need to install it. But Live Server basically mimic a lightweight server on your machine and allow you to browse these HTML files as if it is being browsed by a standard web server like Apache or Nginx. In order to run these files, you can simply click right mouse button and open with Live Server. And it will open it with a standard port 5500. Right now we don't have anything here, so I'm going to write a basic tag. And the moment we save it, it reflects instantly over here. So this will set up our basic development environment, and let's dive into the very first topic about what is var, what is const, and what are these keywords. In order to explain that in more better way, let me write a function in JavaScript. Oops. And we'll say print loop. And this function will do nothing but simply run a basic loop. And to do that, let me define a var here, or with a for loop. Let's say var I is equal to 0, I is less than 5, and I plus plus, a very standard typical for loop. And I'm going to print into my console.log. Current iteration is, I'm going to concatenate I. At the end, I'm going to call my function. The moment it happens, if I go to my browser and open the inspect or the console window, you can see the output started with 0. That is what we wrote. I is equal to 0, which run till the i's value is less than 5. And the moment its value reaches to 5, it exits the loop. So this is a very simple and basic loop. But what will happen if I print, if I do a console.log over here, I value is, and I'm going to print my I. What will happen if I print this I outside my for loop? Let's see what happens. And here I can see I value is 5. Let me zoom in so it is more visible. And this is amazing. But let's understand why I can access this I and how come its value reaches to 5. So this for loop basically iterate, initiated with 0 and it get incremented. Right after incremented, it check whether it satisfies the condition. If the condition is satisfied, it goes inside my for loop until the condition is satisfied. So at the last, when I is 4, I get incremented and it validate whether it satisfy the condition. And this time I is 5, which does not satisfy the condition, and it exit the loop. But because we defined I as var, as a standard JavaScript variable, its scope is limited to its current parent. And in this case, the current parent of I is print loop. That means I is accessible throughout the entire function. And that's why the incremented I can see it as a 5. But what will happen if I change this var to late? And the moment I save, I can see an error over here. My iteration started with 0 till 4, and on line number 6, that is here, it says uncaught reference error I is not defined. What changed? It changed that the scope of my variable I get automatically changed by late to the current scope, to the current block. And the scope of I, the accessibility of I variable, is no longer available throughout its parent, that is print loop. That means my I, the variable I, is only available to my current block, which is for loop. And using variable as late is very essential, is very important if we are having a very specific scope. If you wish to initiate another I in a separate line over here, it's quite possible. So we can create another variable. And this I and this I are two totally different variables because they are scoped differently. Until and unless it's late. The moment we change from var to late, its scope limits to the current block. And that's the reason the I is not accessible outside the for and only available inside the for. That's the key difference between var and late. And on the top of that, there's one more variable we have seen, that is const or constant. As the name suggests, constant basically do not allow you to change the value once it is defined. That means it is immutable. So to define a constant, let's say I define it as a my age and is equal to 100, which is obviously not my age. But if I want to change this age value, let's say to 110, in this case, on line number 11, it is not possible to change the value of my age. And the reason behind that, it's a constant, its value is immutable. Once it is defined, it is defined. It cannot be modified. And that's all about var, late, and constant. So var, late, and const keyword. That brings us to the second topic. What is this keyword? Now this keyword basically defines the different behavior based on not where it is defined, based on how you are being called, how this keyword is being called. And to demonstrate, let me create one more example here. So if I go right now and see, you can see the error invalid assignment to const my age on line number 12. To eliminate this error, I will simply comment out line number 12 so that I can execute the remain next topic. And to moving towards the second example, let me provide a proper code comment. This keyword example. Let me define an object in JavaScript. Let's say I define an object user and I provide a full name, and I'll give my name as a full name as a Mayur Patil. And here I'm going to create a function within the object. Let's say I create a function this, and this function basically print nothing but log this. Now this keyword basically defines the current parent, and that's exactly what we are going to see. So if I simply use user.teach and if I save it, if I jump back to my browser, let me reload. So on line number 21, after property ID, so something is missing here and the assignment of the function was wrong. And this one is also giving us trouble. So I'm going to comment this code So all of my errors are gone. And the moment the errors are gone, you can see here one object. And this object is nothing but this keyword. And it defines my entire object. As I said, this keyword defines the current object, the current parent object. And since this keyword is being printed inside a teach function, it refers to its parent, that is user object. And that's exactly what it printed. The object full name, teach, and then there is a function. But what will happen, instead of calling it, if I try to print console.log user.teach, and I'm not calling it, so I'll better comment it out, and I want to see what this object is all about. And when I save it, you'll realize it is nothing but a standard function. Now the key difference is here, I did not invoke this function, I simply try to print this function to see, and you can see its prototype is nothing but an object. In order to understand it in more different way, let's copy this object into another variable. So I'm going to create a constant, and we are going to actually assign this teach function to this obj variable or a constant. Remember again, I am not initiating it, I am simply assigning it to a new variable. And now here I'm going to execute this obj. And the moment I execute this obj, you will realize it is printing the parent as window. Now as earlier, as I said, that this keyword's behavior changes is not based on where it is implemented. It is based on who is calling it, how you are calling it. And the difference is, the moment we took this function teach outside this user object and assigned to a brand new variable obj, and when we printed, it unbound this function from this user parent, and it's straight assigned to the root element of the DOM, that is window. And now this function is a part of window root element. And that's the reason when I say user.teach assigned to obj and execute the obj, and inside the obj we are printing this keyword, it is showing me Windows object. That means the function's behavior or this object changed the way we call. If you are calling it via user, it is giving a reference to user. If you are calling it outside by detached from user, then it is attaching it to the Windows object. But what will happen right after we detach it, I still want to attach it to the user. And that's quite possible by creating another object, let's say obj2. And here I'm going to use teach, and I'm binding it to the user object. And the moment we do that, and if you're calling obj2 this time, it is correctly showing again my object Mayur Patil, because this time my user object bound to my function teach function bound to the user object, and now it is again showing me parent as a user. That's all about this keyword. And this keyword changes again in the arrow function because it is very important. And that brings us to the third topic, arrow function, and why it is so complicated to understand in the first place. But let me simplify it for you. Let's simplify it in a very simple way. Let's imagine we create a function. I'll say const, let's say user details. I'm defining it as a function, and in the function I'm simply printing console.log I am from user details function. And I'm going to call this function right after I defined it this way. And if you see, you can see in the log I am from user detail function. But can we modify it as an arrow function or as a lambda function? It's very easy to do that. We can simply remove this arrow function and use it like this. And that's all. It's still, if you reload the page, you can see it is printing the data. So function keyword is gone if you're defining it as an arrow. But what will happen if I want to make it parameterized, if I want to provide some parameter over here? You can pass all parameters just like as you were providing previously. And here you can provide a parameter full name, and I'm going to concatenate it as the old style, and simply at a time of invocation you can provide a full name parameter over here, and here you can see the correct output has been concatenated to the final result. So in arrow function you can always provide a parameter supplied by arrow function. Now there is one more shortcut. If you're firing only one line of a code inside your function, these curly brackets are also not required. And you can take this constant at the top and end it with the statement. So it becomes a single line statement. So user details followed by your first parameter and arrow function simply do the console.log. Now there is a feature I have installed in my Visual Studio Code about a code beautifier, and it result the moment I save this code, it is taking me to the next page or next line. So my code will be properly beautified, properly formatted, but it's really not required. You can still see the function is properly getting called. And instead of console.log, if you wanted to return some data, right here, we can return some data. Let's say my name is, and you can concatenate it to full name. And at a time of user detail, you can actually print it console.log user detail and with parameter. But if you're using arrow function, this return keyword is also not required, and you can simply return the value right from here. So because it is returning the value, I injected user detail function inside console.log with a parameter, of course. And just like how the function keyword is removed with arrow function, the return keyword is also really not required. And you can see the output, my name, Mayur Patil. So that's very simplified version of arrow function. And we are going to see arrow function into more detail in the future videos at a time of array manipulation, array filter, and array mapping. Thank you very much. Let's wait for the next session.